Welcome to TOCHI Stories. Please don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on post notification because it will mean the whole world to me. Now let's get right into the story. Brace yourself. The clock ticked softly against the silence of a small one-bedroom apartment. Dr. Ifeanyi lay half asleep on her thin mattress, her body aching from the 12-hour shift she had barely completed a few hours ago. The hum of the ceiling fan did little to drown the lingering thoughts of unpaid bills, her mother's rising medical expenses, and her younger brother's pending school fees. Just as sleep began to pull her into its arms, her phone vibrated violently on the wooden crate she used as a bedside table. Half conscious, she reached for it, her heart instantly accelerating at the thought of an emergency call from a clinic. But the number was unknown. Her first instinct was to ignore it, probably a wrong number or one of those midnight fraudsters who preyed on desperation. But something in her gut wouldn't let her ignore it. Against her better judgment, she swiped to answer. Hello. Hello. Please, you need to come quickly. My baby, she's not breathing properly. The deep male voice was panicked but commanding, heavy with anxiety, yet possessing an undertone of power that was hard to ignore. Ifeanyi instantly sat up, every ounce of sleep wiped from her system. Sir, calm down. Is your daughter convulsing? What's her age? She asked, already reaching for her medical kit. I don't know. Look, just come. I'll send the address. Please hurry, the voice ordered before the call abruptly ended. Almost immediately, a text popped up. An address in Lekki Phase 1, a part of Lagos that Ifeanyi only ever saw in movies or heard about in passing. Wealth. Opulence. A place far removed from her world of struggling doctors, unpaid salaries, and cheap commercial buses. There was a time to think. Despite the distance and the fact that she wasn't officially on duty, Ifeanyi grabbed her worn-out stethoscope, packed her emergency supplies into her faded medical bag, and threw on the cleanest pair of jeans and blouse she could find. Outside, the streets were mostly deserted, save for the occasional thunder rumbling in the distance, warning of an impending storm. She flagged down the only taxi she could find at that hour, negotiating a fare with a driver who eyed her skeptically when she mentioned the location. Madam, people like us no day enter that cane place o' wedding happen, he asked, but the desperate look in her eyes was enough to make him start the engine. As the car zoomed through the wet, empty roads, Ifeanyi's heart pounded, not just from worry for the child, but from stepping into a world far beyond her own. The taxi came to a halt in front of an enormous wrought iron gate guarded by two stern-looking security men. The mansion beyond was the kind she'd only ever seen on Instagram. Towering pillars, glass walls, manicured lawns, and an aura of untouchable wealth. As she stepped out, gripping her bag tightly, one guard stepped forward, eyeing her from head to toe like she was out of place. And truthfully, she was. Good morning. I'm Dr. Ifeanyi. I was called for an emergency, she announced, voice steady but heart racing. The guards exchanged looks before opening the gate, one muttering into a walkie-talkie. Ogade, wait, he said. She walked through, swallowing her nerves. Inside the mansion, a butler led her through pristine marble floors and past glass chandeliers that looked like they cost more than her entire salary for the year. Her footsteps echoed until the butler gestured toward an upstairs room. As she stepped in, her eyes searched for the child, but instead, lying sprawled on a velvet couch was a man, a very grown, very muscular, very feverish man, shirtless, drenched in sweat, and groaning in discomfort. His skin glistened with fever, and he had his hand pressed against his forehead. You the doctor?" he asked, his tone half surprised, half annoyed, voice thick with both command and exhaustion. "Where's the baby?" Ifeanyi asked, scanning the room. The man blinked, confused, then cursed under his breath. "I meant me. I call my baby myself sometimes. I didn't mean. Oh damn." Ifeanyi stood frozen for a moment as the realization hit her. This wasn't a child emergency. It was a billionaire man who misdialed his personal physician in a fever-induced haze. Her first instinct was annoyance. Here she was, racing across town, risking a storm, thinking a child was in danger, only to find a grown man who called himself baby when sick. But the annoyance didn't last long, because the man's condition was visibly severe. His lips were pale, breathing shallow. his shirt discarded due to the heat of the fever. "Forget the misunderstanding. Let me check you," she said, quickly slipping into professional mode. As she moved closer, she couldn't help but notice how absurdly handsome he was. Sharp jawline, full lips, thick lashes, even sick. His wealth was written in every detail of his appearance. But none of that mattered now. Patient first. Everything else was noise. As Iphigenia worked, her hands steady and practiced, she began asking the standard questions: symptoms, duration, any medications taken. Between his groggy replies, she learned he had been battling a high fever for 2 days, coupled with body weakness and chest discomfort. His personal physician had traveled abroad for a conference, and he had been meaning to call another doctor, but somehow dialed the wrong number. "You should have gone to the hospital," Iphigenia scolded softly, adjusting the Ford drip she had set up using her supplies. He scoffed weakly. "Hospitals are too noisy, too many people. I hate them." His voice was gruff, but beneath it was a fatigue that was deeper than the illness itself. As the drip slowly worked its magic, his breathing evened out. His dark eyes, clearer now, studied her. "What's your name?" he asked. "Dr. Iphigenia," she responded without looking up. "And you?" she added, more out of curiosity than protocol. "Chisum," he replied simply. "Chisum Okafor." The name struck a chord. Iphigenia's hand paused midair. She'd heard that name before. The billionaire owner of Okafor Holdings, one of the largest conglomerates in Lagos, with stakes in oil, real estate, and technology. A man whose face graced the cover of Forbes Africa. A man as powerful as he was elusive. And here he was, half naked, helpless, and depending on her. The irony of life made her lips twitch. Minutes turned into hours as the fever gradually broke. As his strength returned, so did the walls around him. Chisum shifted back into his stoic self, his words fewer, his gaze guarded. But between those guarded looks, Iphigenia caught glimpses of a man burdened, not just by physical sickness, but by something heavier. Loneliness, pain, loss. Just as she packed her bag to leave, a small voice echoed from the hallway. "Daddy." A tiny figure stood in pink pajamas, rubbing sleepy eyes, a little girl, no more than 5, with the same deep brown skin, the same sharp features as Chisum. "Zara," he called softly, suddenly more vulnerable than he had been all night. The little girl padded over to him, hugging him tightly. Then her eyes turned to Iphigenia, curious and bright. "Who's that?" she asked, voice sweet but cautious. Iphigenia smiled. A smile that neither she nor Chisum realized was about to change all of their lives forever. Iphigenia had barely zipped her medical bag when the sky outside cracked open with a thunderous roar. Rain poured down in sheets, pounding against the glass walls of the mansion like 1,000 drummers. The security guard who escorted her inside reappeared at the door, shaking his head. "Madam, you no fit go anywhere now. Everywhere Don flood," he announced, gesturing to the growing pool of water forming on the driveway. Her heart sank. She pulled her phone from her pocket, but the network signal was gone, and the battery blinked at 5%. No calls, no taxis, no way out. She looked back at Chisum, who was now sitting up on the couch, a towel draped over his shoulder as he sipped warm water, visibly better. His usual stern expression softened for a moment as he took in her dilemma. "Looks like you're stuck," he said, folding his arms. There was a certain amusement in his voice, but it was devoid of malice. Just observation. Iphigenia paced near the window, biting her lip, wrestling with the awkwardness of being trapped in the home of a man whose world was galaxies away from hers. "I'll wait in the foyer or the kitchen. I don't mind. Just until it clears," she murmured, hugging herself against the cold that was starting to creep in. Chisum raised an eyebrow. "Nonsense. You're not sitting in the kitchen like a stray cat." He slowly stood, his tall frame towering as he gestured toward one of the guest rooms down the hallway. "There's a guest suite. Take it. You've done enough tonight." She opened her mouth to argue, but exhaustion won. She hadn't eaten since noon the previous day. She hadn't rested properly in weeks. Still, a knot of discomfort twisted in her stomach, not fear, not exactly, but the sheer strangeness of the situation. A struggling doctor with no car, stuck in the home of one of the richest men in Lagos, because of a misdialed number. Fate truly had a wicked sense of humor. As the thunder rumbled on, Chisum disappeared briefly and returned with a tray, hot tea, bread, and scrambled eggs. "Eat," he commanded simply, placing it on the side table near her. She blinked in surprise. I'll wait for the housekeeper, or she's asleep. And frankly, you're not leaving this house until you eat something." There was no edge to his voice this time, only a strange, quiet insistence. It was unnerving, and yet comforting. She sat on the edge of the couch and began eating, stealing glances at him as he settled opposite her, now fully dressed in a casual gray sweatshirt and joggers, his feet bare against the marble floor. As the storm raged outside, the mansion seemed to shrink, not in size, but in tension. Two strangers, from different worlds, sat together. Between them were walls of class, status, and guarded hearts. But within the silence that followed, something fragile and unexpected began to form, the earliest threads of connection. Morning arrived with an almost deliberate brightness, as though the storm had never happened. Sunlight streamed through the massive windows, dancing across the marble floors and casting soft golden hues on everything it touched. Ifeanyi awoke in the guest room, momentarily disoriented by the softness of the mattress beneath her, a far cry from the thin foam she was used to back home. For a moment, she could pretend she was someone else, someone who belonged in spaces like this. But reality was quick to remind her. Her phone was completely dead. Her worn-out sneakers sat neatly by the door where she'd left them, looking comically out of place against the luxury furniture. She freshened up as best as she could, then tiptoed out of the room, unsure whether she should leave, announce herself, or simply disappear. She found Chisum already in the living room, dressed in a crisp white t-shirt and navy blue trousers, sipping coffee and scrolling through his tablet. He looked different. Less feverish, more composed, but still carrying that air of someone constantly bracing for battle, whether in business, family, or life. He glanced up when he noticed her standing awkwardly at the entrance. "Morning," he greeted, voice neutral but not unfriendly. "Morning," she echoed, shifting on her feet. "Thank you for the room and the food. I should get going." He set his tablet down, leaned back, and studied her for a moment, as though weighing something. "Wait," he said suddenly, standing and disappearing into another room. When he returned, he was holding a small brown envelope. "For your trouble, and for the midnight house call," he added, handing it to her. Ifeanyi hesitated. The envelope felt heavy. She could already guess what was inside, far more than her consultation fee. She swallowed hard, debating. Part of her needed the money. Her mother's dialysis fees were overdue. Her brother's WEC registration was hanging by a thread. But something about the gesture, about accepting that much from someone like him, felt like surrendering a piece of herself. Her pride, her independence, her fight. "No, sir. Thank you, but no. I was just doing my job," she said firmly, handing it back. His brows knitted. "You must be the first person to turn down free money from me," he muttered, half amused, half confused. For a brief second, Ifeanyi wondered if she had just burned a bridge she didn't even know she had. But Chisum said nothing more. Instead, his lips quirked upward in the faintest hint of a smile, one that didn't quite reach his eyes, but lingered long enough to stir something unexpected in both of them. As Ifeanyi made her way toward the front door, ready to step back into her world of noise, struggle, and survival, a tiny voice called out behind her, "Doctor Lady, wait." She turned to see Zara, barefoot, curly-haired, and still in her pink pajamas, running down the stairs with an energy that only a 5-year-old could possess. The little girl flung her arms around Ifeanyi's waist without warning, hugging her tightly. "Don't go yet," Zara pouted, looking up with big, pleading eyes. "Stay and have breakfast with me." Ifeanyi laughed, an actual, full laugh she hadn't felt in months. I have to go, sweetheart." "I have work," she replied gently, crouching to Zara's level. But the child's little arms tightened around her. "But Daddy never eats breakfast with me. Maybe he will if you stay." For a moment, the air shifted. Chisum stood behind them, hands in pockets, watching the scene with a strange expression, part surprise, part softness, and part something he couldn't quite name. It was rare for Zara to warm up to anyone so quickly. Since the divorce and the ugly battles with Linda, Zara had become shy around strangers, cautious in ways a child her age shouldn't have had to learn. And yet, here she was, hugging this doctor, this stranger, as though she had known her all her life. He cleared his throat, attempting to sound unaffected. "Zara, don't bother the doctor. She has things to do," he said, but his voice lacked its usual firmness. Ifeananya straightened, brushing Zara's hair back with gentle fingers. Her heart tugged. She hadn't planned this. She hadn't planned any of this. It was supposed to be a call, a patient, a treatment, then back to her life. But as she looked at Zara's hopeful face, and then at Chisum, whose usual steel mask seemed to waver, she felt something shift deep within her. Against every logical bone in her body, she heard herself say, maybe I can stay. Just for breakfast." Chisum blinked, caught off guard. Zara squealed with joy, grabbing her hand. And just like that, what started as a mistake began to thread itself into something neither of them could quite define. Yet, the following days were a tug-of-war between logic and emotion for Ifeananya. She tried to convince herself that the breakfast at the mansion was a one-off, a bizarre chapter in her otherwise straightforward, if exhausting, life. But Zara had other plans. On the third morning after her visit, a call came through, not from Chisum, but from a housekeeper named Mama Doris. Her tone was urgent yet slyly amused. "Madam Doctor, please come quick. Small Madam day sick she day cry say now only you fit treat am," the woman said. Ifeanyanya's heart raced with concern, her mind already running through possible symptoms. Without wasting time, she canceled her clinic shift for the day, grabbed her medical bag, and took the fastest route back to the mansion, barely noticing the disapproving stares of her colleagues, who whispered about how she seemed distracted lately. Upon arrival, Ifeananya was greeted at the gate by a security guard who smirked knowingly. He led her inside, and to her utter shock and mild annoyance, she found Zara sitting on a living room couch, legs swinging, perfectly healthy. No fever, no cough, no visible illness. The little girl grinned the moment she saw her. "I told them I'm sick so you would come," Zara announced proudly, hands on her hips like it was the most natural thing in the world. Chisum was leaning against the staircase railing, watching the scene unfold with arms crossed, an unspoken apology dancing in his eyes, though his lips quirked upward in the faintest amusement. "I tried to stop her," he said, shrugging, "but apparently I'm not as persuasive as you." Ifeananya sighed, pinching the bridge of her nose. "Zara, sweetheart, you can't pretend to be sick." "That's very naughty," she scolded, but her tone was soft, betraying the fact that a part of her was glad to be there. Despite the fake emergency, Ifeananya stayed. How could she not when Zara clung to her with all the innocent desperation of a child who had found a safe space in a world that had given her too many reasons to be wary? Chisum invited her to stay for tea, then lunch, and somehow the day stretched into the evening. Their conversations grew deeper, covering topics far beyond small talk: medicine, business, childhood dreams, the cost of trust, and the scars of betrayal. Beneath his stoic exterior, Chisum was a man fractured by wounds money couldn't heal. And beneath her humble resilience, Ifeananya carried burdens of survival no one in his circle could ever understand. Yet, the more they talked, the more they realized that perhaps broken pieces could fit together in the most unexpected ways. By the time she finally stood to leave, Zara clung to her legs again, and Chisum's eyes lingered a little longer than they should have. Neither of them said it aloud, but something unspoken had shifted. This wasn't just a mistake anymore. Ifeanyanya's return visits to the mansion soon became frequent, first under the pretense of checking on Zara, then on Chisum's request for minor health checks, and eventually simply because being there felt right. But with the frequency of her presence came curiosity, both from the mansion staff and from Ifeananya herself. One cloudy afternoon, while Zara napped upstairs and Mama Doris prepared dinner, Ifeananya found herself seated across from Chisum in his private study, a space that was part office, part sanctuary, and entirely a reflection of the man who owned it. Books lined the walls: economics, philosophy, legal codes, even children's books tucked randomly among the shelves. A leather-bound photo album lay open on the mahogany desk, and without meaning to pry, her eyes caught an image of a smiling younger Chisum with a woman, elegant, stunning, and unmistakably the kind whose beauty could command rooms. He followed her gaze and sighed, closing the album gently as though sealing away a memory. "Her name's Linda," he began, his voice carrying a tired edge. "Ex-wife. Zara's, well, she used to call herself Zara's mother." His fingers tapped against the wood, a restless habit of someone revisiting wounds that never quite closed. Ifeananya stayed silent, allowing him space to speak. He continued, "We met when I was still building my company. She was charming, ambitious, the kind of woman everyone said a man in my position should have. But ambition without love is poison. The moment I was diagnosed with hypertrophic cardiomyopathy, everything changed." His jaw tightened. "She didn't marry me. She married my name, my assets, my status. And when I got sick, she walked, took half of everything, and tried to fight me for Zara, claiming I was unfit." Ifeananya felt a knot tighten in her chest. She had seen patients abandoned by family during illness, but hearing it from someone like Chisum, who had everything yet was left with nothing but betrayal, hit differently. "I fought her in court for 2 years. Won sole custody eventually. But not before the tabloids had a field day, and not before Zara started asking why her mummy didn't visit anymore." His voice cracked for a second, before he masked it again with that cold professionalism that had likely built his empire. "Since then, it's been me and Zara. I trust no one, and frankly, I prefer it that way." Silence settled between them, heavy but honest. Ifeananya reached across the table, her fingers grazing his hand briefly before she realized what she was doing and pulled back. I'm sorry. No one deserves that," she said quietly. What neither of them admitted, but both felt, was that the walls between them had shifted yet again, just a little closer to crumbling. Lagos is a city where secrets have legs, and rumors travel faster than the speed of light. By the time Ifeanyanya's presence at Chisum's mansion reached its 3rd week, the whispers had started, not just within the walls of the estate, but outside as well. The staff, though discreet, were not immune to curiosity. "Have you noticed how Olga smiles more these days?" one cleaner whispered to another. "Dr. Ifeananya Day work miracles, oh," another chuckled as they polished the stair rails. But it wasn't just the staff. Word filtered into Chisum's exclusive circles, the tight-knit community of the ultra-wealthy, where every deviation from the norm was dissected like a scandal. Chisum, the reclusive billionaire who had sworn off relationships since his messy divorce, now had a woman, a common doctor, visiting regularly. It didn't take long before the narrative began to spin. Ifeananya felt it in subtle ways. Her phone rang more frequently with calls from colleagues asking odd questions. Her supervisor at the clinic, usually indifferent, suddenly became concerned about her frequent absences. "You've been distracted lately, doctor," he noted with thinly veiled judgment. Patients who had once respected her started looking at her differently, their gazes curious, some admiring, others skeptical. And even on her walks home, street vendors and neighbors, people who barely noticed her before, now gave her knowing smiles. On, doctor." Billionaire wife loading, a market woman teased one day, sending waves of embarrassment through Ifeananya. Her humble, private life was slowly becoming public fodder. Chisum noticed the shift too, though his reaction was less visible, except in the subtle tightening of his jaw, the increased presence of his security detail, and the way his hands occasionally clenched into fists whenever he scrolled through online blogs whispering about him and the mystery woman. But when Ifeananya confronted him one evening, suggesting she should stay away until the rumors died down, his answer was simple but firm. "Let them talk," he said, eyes meeting hers without wavering. "I've lived long enough to know that the world never stops talking. What matters is, do you care?" His words held weight, but beneath them was a vulnerability he rarely exposed. Ifeananya swallowed hard, her chest tightening. She didn't answer, not yet. But as Zara tugged her hand, pulling her toward the kitchen to bake cookies together, She realized that walking away wasn't as easy as it used to be. Somehow, against every logical argument, this mansion was starting to feel like home. The air felt heavier that day, as though fate itself was holding its breath. Iphigenia arrived at the mansion expecting the usual routine: check on Zara, share coffee with Chisum, and maybe linger longer than she admitted to herself. But the moment the gates swung open, a strange tension gripped her. The security guards wore guarded expressions, their usual casual greetings replaced with stiff nods. Something was off. Her instincts as a doctor often bled into her personal life. She could sense when danger loomed, whether it was in a patient's deteriorating vitals or the subtle unease in a room. As she stepped inside, the sound of angry voices echoed from the main lounge. She followed them, her heartbeat accelerating, only to freeze at the threshold. Standing in the middle of the opulent living room was a woman who looked as though she had stepped out of a luxury magazine, slim, elegant, perfectly styled, with layers of arrogance stitched into every inch of her posture. Linda, Chisum's ex-wife. Her eyes were sharp, lips painted in a bold red that contrasted against her flawless dark skin, and her arms were folded like a queen inspecting peasants. Zara sat on the couch, visibly uncomfortable, her small hands gripping a teddy bear as her eyes darted between her parents. Chisum stood nearby, jaw clenched, muscles tight, exuding the kind of restrained fury that could split walls if unleashed. "I'm here to take what's mine," Linda declared, her voice a silken whip. "Zara is my daughter too. You've poisoned her against me long enough." Iphigenia's presence didn't go unnoticed. The moment Linda's eyes landed on her, they narrowed into slits. A cruel smile curved her lips. "Oh, and who is this?" she sneered, her gaze sweeping Iphigenia from head to toe, soaking in the simple blouse, the worn-out shoes, the lack of designer labels. "The nanny? Or—" her eyes glinted with something darker. "Is this your latest charity project, Chisum?" The words sliced through the air, heavy with venom. Chisum stepped forward, shielding both Zara and Iphigenia with his presence. "Linda, you have no right to be here," he growled. But Linda laughed, completely unfazed. "We'll see about that. A mother never loses her rights, especially not to a sick man and his sidekick." Iphigenia felt her hands tremble, but not from fear, no, from rage. Beneath her calm exterior, something fierce stirred, because if Linda thought she could waltz back in and tear apart what was slowly, cautiously being built, she was gravely mistaken. The encounter didn't end in the living room. After a heated back and forth where Chisum threatened to call security and Linda retaliated with thinly veiled legal threats, the ex-wife finally stormed off, temporarily. But Iphigenia's relief was short-lived. Barely an hour after Linda's dramatic exit, her phone buzzed. A number she didn't recognize flashed on the screen. Against better judgment, she answered. "Dr. Iphigenia," Linda's silky voice cooed on the other end, laced with mock sweetness. "We need to talk, woman to woman." Iphigenia's first instinct was to hang up, but something told her that ignoring this woman would only escalate things. "I have nothing to say to you," she replied, trying to sound firmer than she felt. Linda chuckled. "Oh, but you do. Meet me at Café Bloom tomorrow, 10 a.m., alone, unless you'd prefer the alternative, public disgrace." The following morning, Iphigenia found herself seated at Café Bloom, her stomach in knots. Linda arrived precisely on time, draped in a white designer suit, every inch of her radiating power, wealth, and manipulation. She sat gracefully, crossed her legs, and smiled, a predator's smile. "You seem like a smart girl," Linda began, stirring her cappuccino without looking up. "So let's skip the pretense. You don't belong in Chisum's world. You think because you patched him up during a fever, you're qualified to play house." Her gaze sharpened, her words slicing through the air like blades. "I'm giving you an opportunity most women in your position would kill for. Walk away, quietly, now, and you'll find your student loan debts, your mother's hospital bills, even a clinic of your own fully paid for. I'll wire it within 24 hours. For a moment, the offer dangled like a poisoned apple. A lifetime of struggle could disappear with one simple yes. Her mother's dialysis, her brother's education, her father's grave debt, all gone. Ifeanyi gripped the edge of the table, nails digging into the wood, breathing through the whirlwind of emotions, threatening to drown her. "And if I refuse?" she asked, voice steady but ice cold. Linda leaned in, smile widening. "Then I destroy you. I own people in the medical board. I own people in the press. Your name, your career, they'll be ashes before sunset." She sat back, sipping her coffee, as though discussing the weather. But what Linda didn't expect was the fire she was trying to smother. Ifeanyi stood slowly, leaning forward until her face was inches from Linda's. "Then burn it. But understand one thing, if you come for me, you better not miss." She turned and walked away, leaving Linda blinking in stunned fury, a woman who had never been told no. The days that followed were a whirlwind of tension, fear, and simmering rage. True to her word, Linda began her assault, not just on Ifeanyi, but on Chisum's world. Anonymous tips went out to gossip blogs accusing Chisum of neglecting his child while frolicking with a money-hungry doctor. Rumors spread that Ifeanyi had manipulated her way into his life, seducing him for financial gain. The clinic where she worked was bombarded with complaints, false claims that she was stealing drugs, unqualified, and dangerously incompetent. Her supervisor, more concerned with his clinic's reputation than the truth, suspended her pending investigation. Overnight, the life she had fought so hard to build began to crumble under the weight of lies. But Linda's cruelest move came when she filed a formal petition in family court, seeking full custody of Zara. Her argument was a knife to Chisum's already bruised heart, that Chisum was medically unfit to raise a child due to his heart condition, and that Zara was being endangered by his relationship with an unstable, unlicensed woman of questionable background. The court date was set quickly, as Linda's expensive lawyers pulled every string to fast-track the process. For the first time in years, Chisum looked broken. The man who could stare down CEOs, negotiate billion-dollar deals, and dismantle corporate empires now sat in his office, head in his hands, wrestling with the one thing money couldn't buy: peace for his daughter. Ifeanyi visited the mansion that evening, her own life teetering on collapse. But when she saw Chisum sitting there, shoulders hunched, eyes hollow, her own burdens faded. Without a word, she walked over, knelt in front of him, and placed her hands on his knees. "We're not going to let her win," she said softly but with a steel edge in her voice. Chisum looked at her, something vulnerable flickering behind his guarded gaze. "She has everything: the lawyers, the money, the power. She'll drag us through the mud, Ifeanyi," he whispered. "Then we fight dirty, if we must," she whispered back. Her fingers trembled, but not from fear, from determination. Because if Linda thought she was dealing with a desperate doctor and a sick man, she was about to learn something new. Desperation makes people dangerous. And sometimes love does too. The courtroom battles, the media slander, and the relentless stress were taking their toll. Chisum barely slept. His usual sharp, commanding presence dulled into exhaustion, his carefully constructed walls crumbling under the weight of losing control over something far more precious than money: his daughter and his peace. One evening, as the sun set in streaks of burnt orange behind the glass walls of his study, Chisum found himself staring out, hands buried in his pockets, battling something deeper than anger: helplessness. Ifeanyi stood at the door, watching him. She had seen sickness, pain, and loss before, but there was a unique kind of agony in watching a man who was used to controlling everything suddenly drown in things he couldn't command. "I fought my whole life," Chisum said, voice low but heavy. "Fought to be seen, to be respected, to matter. I built this empire from nothing. I survived betrayal, lost but this." He turned, his eyes meeting hers, not the cold, calculating billionaire, but a man stripped bare of pretense. "Fighting for my daughter, fighting to protect what little happiness I've managed to claw out of this miserable existence. It feels different. It feels like I'm losing before I've even begun." Ifeanyi stepped closer, swallowing the lump forming in her throat. She reached for his hand, surprised when he didn't pull away. His palm was warm, calloused, and trembling. "You're not alone in this," she said softly. "You don't have to do this alone, Chisum." And perhaps it was the exhaustion or the realization that vulnerability was no longer a weakness, but survival. But Chisum did something he had never done before. He let the walls drop entirely. His fingers tightened around hers, eyes glistening. Ifyananya. His voice cracked. I didn't think it was possible, not after Linda, not after everything. But every time you show up, every time you smile at Zara, every time you fight even when the world calls you foolish, I realize I'm not fighting just for Zara anymore. His throat bobbed. I'm fighting because somewhere along the way, you became my home too. The words hung in the air between them, heavier than any court document, more powerful than any declaration. Ifyananya's breath caught. Her lips trembled. She wanted to deny it, to retreat behind the comfort of logic. But her heart betrayed her. Chisum, she whispered, her voice thick. I didn't plan this either. But I'm here. I'm not going anywhere. Despite the raw, beautiful moment they shared, the harshness of reality did not wait long before crashing back. The very next morning, Ifyananya received a call from the hospital board, an official summons. Her license was under review. Anonymous complaints had been filed against her, citing unethical behavior, conflict of interest, and improper conduct with a patient. Chisum. Her colleagues, once supportive, now viewed her with wary eyes, their whispers following her like shadows in the hospital corridors. She thinks she's above us now, hanging with billionaires. She's forgotten where she came from. The betrayal from those who once walked her same path stung worse than Linda's threats. The very community she had bled for now stood ready with torches and pitchforks. Meanwhile, Chisum wasn't faring much better. His board of directors grew restless. Investors began questioning his decisions, and rival companies started circling like vultures, sensing blood in the water. For the first time in years, Okafor Holdings felt unstable, not because of bad deals or financial ruin, but because its leader was too distracted fighting personal wars. The media didn't help. Every blog headline painted the same picture: Billionaire's midlife crisis, from boardroom to bedroom with a broke doctor. Inside Chisum's love scandal that could cost him his empire. It was relentless, cruel, and unrelenting. The line between his world and Ifyananya's became sharper, more painful. And as much as they clung to each other, the weight of their different worlds felt suffocating. One evening, as they sat together on the mansion's rooftop, the only place that still felt untouched by the chaos below, Ifyananya whispered, Maybe I should step back. Just until this storm passes." Her voice was hesitant, pained. Chisum's entire body stiffened. His gaze snapped to hers, dark and unreadable. "Don't you dare," he growled, voice low but deadly. "Don't you ever say that again." His hands cupped her face, firm but gentle. "If you walk away, they win. Linda wins. The world wins. I lose everything again." His throat tightened. "I don't care what they say, Ifyananya. You're not my weakness. You're the only thing keeping me sane." She swallowed hard, leaning into his touch, realizing that even as the world tried to rip them apart, some bonds, once formed, were simply unbreakable. When the court date finally arrived, it felt like stepping into a battlefield disguised in marble floors and leather chairs. Linda arrived with an army of high-powered lawyers, dressed in a crisp white suit, her hair perfectly laid, her lips curled into a predatory smile that screamed confidence. Her entire demeanor radiated certainty, the certainty that money, influence, and connections would guarantee her victory. On her side were fabricated witnesses, a former housekeeper who was suddenly willing to testify that Chisum neglected Zara, a medical expert ready to declare Chisum's heart condition made him an unfit father, even a doctored psychological report claiming Zara exhibited signs of emotional distress, living under Chisum's care. Ifyananya sat beside Chisum, her hands cold but her spine straight. She watched as Linda's legal team painted a grotesque picture of a reckless billionaire who prioritized his affair with an unqualified roadside doctor over his daughter's welfare. Every lie twisted deeper than the last. Pictures of her walking in and out of the mansion, snapshots taken without her knowledge, were projected onto the courtroom screens as if they were evidence of scandal. The judge, an older man with sharp eyes, remained impassive, but Ifeananya could feel how easily public perception could be manipulated. She looked over at Zara, seated quietly with a court-appointed child advocate, her small eyes wide with confusion and fear. It broke her heart. But then, as the session progressed, something shifted. Chisum, despite the personal attacks, stood and took the stand. His voice, though hoarse, carried power. "Yes," he admitted, "I am sick. But that does not make me incapable of loving or protecting my daughter. My daughter doesn't need perfect health. She needs presence. She needs someone who tucks her in at night, who reads her bedtime stories, who teaches her what loyalty looks like, not someone who abandoned her when life got inconvenient." His eyes burned as they locked onto Linda. This isn't about Zara's well-being. This is about control. And if this court is blind enough not to see that, then perhaps justice isn't what happens here. His words left a ripple through the courtroom. Even Ifeananya, sitting silently, felt her chest expand with pride. No matter how this ended, one thing was certain: the fight was far from over. The courtroom atmosphere grew heavier with each passing moment, suffocating everyone inside with the weight of manipulated narratives. Linda's lawyers moved with ruthless precision, presenting one witness after another, each adding another nail to Chisum's coffin. But the most devastating betrayal came when the mansion's head of security, a man Chisum had employed for nearly 7 years, took the stand. With an air of regret carefully rehearsed, the man testified that Chisum had been frequently absent, leaving Zara for long stretches without proper supervision, claiming Ifeananya was merely a visitor with no formal guardianship, often present in inappropriate circumstances. His words sliced deeper than any knife, not because they were true, but because they came from someone trusted. Ifeananya sat frozen, fists clenched beneath the table, her heartbeat drumming in her ears. She wanted to scream, to stand and shout the truth, but the courtroom demanded composure, a composure that was rapidly crumbling. The judge's brow furrowed as more doctor documents surfaced, fake complaints to child welfare, fabricated medical reports alleging that Chisum's heart condition was rapidly deteriorating. The assault was relentless. Chisum, though composed outwardly, sat stiffly, his fingers trembling beneath the table, his knuckles white. Only Ifeananya, sitting close enough to feel his energy shift, noticed the subtle signs that his body was nearing its limit. His breathing grew heavier, his face paler. But still, he clenched his jaw and endured it, because this wasn't just about him. It was about Zara, about not letting Linda win. The final blow came when Linda herself took the stand. Dressed like a grieving mother, she wiped non-existent tears from the corners of her eyes, her voice trembling just enough to sound authentic. "Your Honor," she began, "I made mistakes. I admit that. But I was young. I was overwhelmed. I didn't abandon my daughter. I was pushed away by a man who wanted to control everything. I've changed. I'm here now because my child deserves stability, not to be caught between her father's failing health and his entanglement with an unlicensed, unfit woman." She turned her gaze toward Ifeananya then, her eyes sharp, her lips curling in satisfaction. "This is not about money. This is about a mother's love." The courtroom buzzed. And for the first time since the trial began, Ifeananya felt the icy grip of doubt creep into the judge's expression. She realized with horrifying clarity that this wasn't a fight bound by truth. It was a fight being dictated by who could twist the truth loudest. Just when it felt like all hope was slipping away, a ripple of fate neither Chisum nor Ifeananya could have ever predicted arrived in the form of an unintentional mistake, a clerical error that turned into the weapon that would shake the foundations of everything. On the third day of the custody hearing, the opposing counsel submitted a document they believed would finalize their case, a forged birth certificate meant to demonstrate Linda's legal maternity of Zara. But an eagle-eyed legal assistant from Chisum's team spotted something odd. The document had been copied from an outdated hospital record system, and the metadata embedded in the file showed inconsistencies. Curious, the assistant ordered a confidential subpoena for Zara's original hospital birth records to countercheck. The results landed with the force of a nuclear bomb. The DNA test, filed alongside the original birth certificate, revealed a horrifying truth. Linda was not Zara's biological mother. The woman who had stood in court crying crocodile tears, claiming maternal love, had lied. Zara was not her child. The room erupted into gasps and whispers as the judge, his face now twisted with shock and disbelief, read the official sealed DNA report aloud. Linda's face lost all color. Her confident, predatory smile vanished, replaced with a mask of sheer panic. She stood abruptly, stammering incoherently. There must be a mistake. This is impossible. Chisum sat stunned, his brain struggling to reconcile the truth that had just shattered over his head. For 5 years, he had believed Linda was Zara's mother, the woman who had once pretended to cradle her, who abandoned her with cruel indifference. How could this be? The judge slammed his gavel for silence, his voice thunderous. This court will take a recess immediately. Counsel approached the bench. But the damage was done. The media, present in full force, exploded into a frenzy. Phones rang. Journalists scrambled. Billionaire's custody battle reveals fake motherhood claim. Headlines formed in real time. And in the center of it all sat Zara, innocent, oblivious to the chaos, holding tightly to Ifeanyi's hand. Chisum turned to her, eyes glassy, his lips trembling as realization dawned. Linda's entire case was crumbling like sand in the wind. But with it came a terrifying new question. If Linda wasn't the biological mother, then who was? As the courtroom emptied during recess, Linda's carefully constructed world began to unravel faster than she could salvage it. Her lawyers huddled in frantic whispers, visibly panicking, some already preparing to withdraw representation in anticipation of fraud charges. Chisum stood at the far end of the room, his chest heaving, the weight of betrayal compounding as the adrenaline faded. Ifeanyi gripped his arm, steadying him, noticing how pale his face had become, how beads of sweat pooled along his temple. "Chisum, are you okay?" she asked, voice tight with worry. He opened his mouth to answer, but instead staggered backward, clutching his chest. His breathing hitched. His hands trembled. And then his legs buckled beneath him. "Chisum!" Ifeanyi screamed, catching him as best as her smaller frame could. Panic exploded around the room. Zara cried out, rushing forward. But one of the guards scooped her away while Ifeanyi screamed for help. Her doctor instincts kicked in. She eased Chisum onto the floor, checked his pulse, rapid, thready. His skin was clammy, his breathing shallow. "Get an ambulance." "Now!" she yelled, tearing open his shirt as she began emergency chest compressions, fighting against the tears that threatened to blind her. This wasn't supposed to happen. Not now. Not like this. Not when they were so close to turning the tide. As the paramedics arrived, everything blurred. Ifeanyi rode with him, her hand clamped in his, whispering desperate prayers. At the hospital, he was rushed into intensive care. Hours dragged like days as doctors worked to stabilize his heart. Meanwhile, news of the courtroom scandal overshadowed even the reports of his collapse. Social media was ablaze. Supporters began rallying behind Chisum and Ifeanyi, realizing they had been targets of a manipulative lie. But for Ifeanyi, none of that mattered. Sitting beside Chisum's hospital bed, watching the rise and fall of his chest aided by machines, all that mattered was that he lived. Tears streamed silently down her face as she gripped his hand tighter. Please don't leave me," she whispered. "Not when we've just started living." The hours that followed were a blur of machines beeping, doctors pacing, and nurses moving with practiced urgency. Ifeanyi sat by Chisum's side, her fingers laced tightly through his, whispering desperate prayers between ragged breaths. Her mind was a storm, flashing between the courtroom chaos, Zara's innocent face, and the heart monitor that echoed every fragile beat of the man she had come to love more than life itself. Her eyes, red and swollen from crying, never left his face. "Fight," she whispered. "Please fight. You've survived worse. You can survive this too." She had spent years saving lives, but this was the first time she felt utterly terrified that no amount of medical knowledge could stop fate if it chose to be cruel. By dawn, the lead cardiologist emerged, removing his gloves with a sigh. "He's stable for now," he said, voice professional but laced with gravity. "The stress exacerbated his condition. He'll need to avoid any more triggers like this," or the doctor didn't finish. "He didn't need to." Ifeanyi nodded, understanding the unspoken warning. She walked back into the room where Chisum lay pale, weak, but alive. His eyelids fluttered open as she approached, and when their eyes met, she collapsed onto his chest in a flood of relief. His trembling fingers brushed her cheek. "Did we win?" he rasped. Ifeanyi let out a tearful laugh, pressing her forehead to his. "Yes. Yes, we did." The courtroom had resumed without him. But the damage to Linda's case was irreparable. With the DNA bombshell exposed, the judge dismissed her custody claim with prejudice. Furthermore, the court initiated criminal proceedings against Linda for fraud, perjury, and falsifying legal documents. As the media descended like hawks, Linda was escorted out of the courthouse in handcuffs, her once flawless reputation shattered beyond repair. The headlines were relentless. Billionaire's ex-wife exposed. The woman who faked motherhood. Justice for Chisum. The custody battle that stunned Nigeria. But for Chisum, victory felt bittersweet. He had kept Zara. He had exposed the truth. But it had nearly cost him his life. As he lay in that hospital bed, watching Ifeanyi dote on Zara, who now refused to leave his side, he realized something profound. Life was fragile. And the greatest wealth wasn't in empires, but in the people who would fight for you when everything else collapsed. 3 months later, the mansion was no longer just a house. It had become a home. The chaos had finally quieted. The court had not only granted Chisum sole custody of Zara, but it also issued restraining orders against Linda, banning her from coming within a kilometer of them. The media storm eventually faded, replaced by stories of redemption, love, and resilience. Okafor Holdings bounced back stronger than before, largely because of the public sympathy and support that rallied behind Chisum's story. Investors who once doubted him were now eager to be associated with a man who had not only survived betrayal, but had done so with integrity. But beyond the boardrooms and headlines, something even greater was unfolding. Chisum and Ifeanyi were finally allowing themselves to breathe, to love, and to heal. One sunny afternoon, as the three of them shared a picnic in the mansion's garden, Zara chasing butterflies while giggling uncontrollably, Chisum reached into his pocket, his fingers trembling for an entirely different reason this time. Ifeanyi was laughing, her eyes glowing with the kind of happiness she hadn't known she was capable of when she first answered that wrong call at 1 a.m. Chisum cleared his throat. "Ife," he started, his voice unusually soft. She turned, brows raised. Before she could respond, he was on one knee, a small velvet box open in his palm. "You walked into my life because of a mistake, but you stayed because it was destiny. You saved my life. You saved Zara's life. And you taught me that love isn't about contracts or status. It's about showing up. Every single day." His voice wavered. "Marry me, Ifeanyi. Be my wife. Be Zara's mother. Be the reason this house stays a home." For a moment, time stood still. Ifeanyi's hands flew to her mouth, her eyes brimming with tears. "Chisum," her voice cracked, but this time it was from overwhelming joy. "Yes. Yes, 1,000 times yes." Zara squealed in delight, running over and throwing her arms around both of them. "Yay! I have a real mommy now," she cheered, her innocent words wrapping around Ifeanyi's heart like a warm hug. Chisum slipped the ring onto her finger, a perfect fit, like every piece of their imperfect story. And as they embraced, laughter mingling with tears, a familiar sound echoed in the background. Her phone vibrating. She glanced down at the screen. Unknown number. A call. She chuckled, wiping her tears. "Who knows," she whispered to herself, "maybe fate's still dialing." Fire final message. Some mistakes are written by fate, not by error. Because sometimes the wrong number is just the universe's way of connecting the right souls. Thank you for watching this video. What did you learn from this story? Drop it in the comments. Please make sure you like, comment, and subscribe to my YouTube channel TOCHI Stories for more.